Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs encounters video. All right, let's go ahead and let's mix this one in here while I'm continuing to do your mysteries and disappearances suggestions. This one comes from the reddit.com website. They're from the subreddit called Humanoid Encounters, and this one delves into the world of aliens and UFOs. What makes this so fascinating is the fact that this could be another encounter with the infamous Pascagoula abduction case. Those were those aliens that almost looked like they were mummies, and the way that they walked and the way that they interacted, and of course ended up taking two of those people straight up into the aircraft, made it so infamous. I've talked about that in some past videos. I even saw a very good documentary on it there at the Tyler Comic Con earlier this year, or Paranormal Con. Well, this one may have to do with another encounter with those aliens, but it comes from a user by the name of UFO Nodder, and they titled theirs as "In 1949, a Peruvian man encountered mummy-like entities." So let's go ahead and let's share this freaky encounter here. It goes through several stages as well, not only with regards to this person interacting with them, but talking to them, talking about them about God, and then also going into their spacecraft. Very fascinating stuff. So here's what it says. Published in 1968, a full 5 years before the Pascagoula abduction even took place, Jim and Coral Lorenz's book UFOs Over the Americas chapter, the one called The Flesh Crawlers, goes on to describe the event as relayed by investigator Richard Greenwell to the APRO and was put into contact with the abductee via a Peruvian group going by Instituto Peruano de Relaciones Interplanetarias. In this encounter, the abductee is referred to as CAV, an acronym to protect their identity, as Mr. CAV, or V, as described in the report via the recorded tapes of this interaction between Mr. Greenwell and V. Well, the following will be a summation of these events in best order I could manage, as CAV during this interaction with Mr. Greenwell has himself a difficult time recalling which events happened in which order. So, in 1949, CAV was driving on the Pan American Highway to a location called Lomo de Ballena en route from Pucusana to Lima. CAV spotted a shining metallic disc hovering off to the side of the highway and was approximately 500 meters from where he had parked. He made his way over to the disc, which appeared to be hovering 6 feet off of the ground, taking around 10 minutes to arrive. CAV was 20 minutes away from the object when three entities exited the craft. The beings did not appear as far as he could recall to exit from a visible door, but simply arrived in front of him. Quoting CAV directly, he described the entities as, "They didn't have a defined form. They looked like three mummies. They had the profile of human beings, but their legs were joined. They did not have two legs, but one double one, almost like twins." Again, he reiterated that they had the form of, well, the description was as if they were mummies. They had no exterior sign of sex, ears, or eyes. A body, a head, and legs were all joined together. He would then go on to state to Mr. Greenwell that these entities had one large foot, and they moved as such. Yes, he said, they went along the ground, but they moved. They sort of slid along the ground. He went on to state that they moved normally and made no sound when doing so. When describing the hands and the arms, he would go on to say, yes, they had arms, but their hands consisted of a group of 4 fingers stuck together and then a separate thumb. The question of their overall appearance was as such, no, they had a sort of strange skin, a sort of towely, sandy-colored skin. When asked by Mr. Greenwell if CAV meant clothing or a suit of some sort, he replied, no, they didn't have any clothing. Their only covering was a strange towely skin. As well as adding to their facial features or lack thereof, he said the head had no features at all except about the height of the eyes. There was an oblong substance like jelly with a sort of bubble in the center. It was the only exterior feature. No ears, no mouth, no nose, nothing. The nose, or where it should be, had a form of a nose, sort of like when you pass a tight stocking over your face, but there were no nostrils. It was at this point these entities began to speak, and in the interview, CAV could not determine which entities were speaking and whether or not this conversation was occurring via normal speech or via some sort of telepathy. Adding to this already strange encounter, the entities did not speak to him in Spanish, but in an English accent he described as someone who learned the language without adopting an accent. The entities would then ask CAV where they were located and if they were located in North America, to which he informed them that it was in fact South America. At this point, the entities swapped from using English into Spanish. Again, CAV would refer to the Spanish as learned Spanish without a specific accent. When asked if these entities were surprised to find themselves in the wrong continent, CAV stated they did not, and to speak with the chief of the land, which CAV would state there were many chiefs. He attempted to correct the entities, asking if they meant president. However, according to him, they were adamant in using the term chief specifically. In CAV's words, he would then say, well, I said I could arrange maybe for someone to come and speak to them. I said I was frightened that they would do us harm, but they answered that they wanted to do no harm and just wanted to speak to my chief as they had very important things to tell him. And then came a series of questions and answers on both sides. Emphasizing he could not recall which order these questions were answered, CAV would state the following questions are responses between him and these entities. One of the things they told me is that we were playing around with a new substance that could endanger the peace of the world, of the universe. I asked them where they came from, and they said a strange name. We would call it a star, they said, but they came from a place with a strange name I could not understand, probably their planet somewhere. From the conversation we had, I was able to deduce that they were frightened that by playing around with atomic explosions, we could create some sort of chain reaction, which would not only destroy the world, but endanger the universe. In another question, CAV, asked them who their God was, and I noticed a sort of mockery. They asked, God? What God? And so I said, well, the supreme creator who made the universe. And they said, well, we are like gods. How can you be gods? I then asked. And they said we were backward. They said that we fought over a flag, over a frontier, that we had wars over trifling matters, like we were children. We were like children literally still in our diapers. We fought over food, we fought over sea. I then asked them if they did not have those same defects, but they said they had overcome them years ago, centuries ago, in fact. Mr. Greenwald would then ask for clarification of years or centuries, which CAV would reply with, well, I couldn't say. They said a long time ago that they had overcome the defects of our planet. They told me that they had extracted from the sun. I learned later that this is called photosynthesis, which I did not know. The sun, which is the chief source of all their energy, provided them with all their necessary energy. They obtained humidity from the atmosphere. Again, during the conversation, as CAV asked the entities how they traveled across space, he said, no, the name they gave me was strange and unknown to me. I asked them what propulsion method they employed to cross space. They said that at will, they could add or subtract weight from their vehicle. They accumulated energy through a heat system. Well, I don't understand it at all, but they said it was a method of changes in temperature which created some sort of energy. They said that we had to swallow, digest, and convert our food into energy whilst they received their energy directly from the sun. They also said they did not practice sex. They said they had no sexes or any desires, and they had no sex problems like us humans. They never felt hunger, which did not make them envious of their brothers. Everything belonged to everyone, while the humans on Earth fought over silly things like flags and lands. I then asked them if they had no sex, how did they reproduce? They said that they had the ability to divide themselves down the middle and split themselves into two creatures. CAV would then ask how they could survive traveling at high speeds without their bodies being harmed, and one instructed CAV to touch them. From CAV, he said, I sort of put my arm around one and pressed his body and had the idea that if I could make him stay, this would be my proof. You see, I was under a state of shock and was not thinking too clearly. I felt something sort of biscuity. They had hard bodies, but they had no bones, apparently. They had no cartilages. This permitted them to receive all sort of blows without damage. I asked them if they had hostile intentions towards us, and they said no. All they wanted is that we stop playing around with such a dangerous weapon. At this point, the entities invited CAV aboard the object itself, unlike other such UFO encounters, and CAV had to physically pull himself into the craft as there was no ladder or steps, which was described as semicircular. Nor was he lifted by any sort of anti gravity system. He would then state that the inside of the craft was mostly empty, besides a quote unquote ledge that circled the whole interior of the craft. Once CAV was inside the craft, the entity made noises amongst themselves, described as similar to static on a radio. These beings would then show CAV how they could share liquids between each other by simply placing their shoulders together. CAV wasn't sure whether or not this was water, as we know it, or some other type of bodily substance, but he was told that they received such moisture from the atmosphere via humidity. Inside the craft, CAV would state this ledge and the encompassing area on the inside of the craft was transparent, and it curved towards the edges of the inside where the disc would naturally appear to follow. And when asked by CAV, the entities stated that the ledge was all that was needed to accumulate energy and to pilot the craft. The craft then rose up as CAV could feel the process as it flew over the coast, stopped, and then went back to its original position. He would have remarked that this felt rather fast, and the entity stated they could travel and maneuver at much higher speeds, but that he would be unable to survive it himself. As they returned and landed back to their original position, CAV would ask these entities to demonstrate this ability to split and divide, to which they complied. One of these entities would lay down on the ground inside the craft, and the middle section of the entity would begin to thin in the middle before splitting in half to form another identical being. The entity stated that the newly formed being retained all memories and knowledge of the original entity after splitting apart. CAV asked if they ever got bored of being eternal and that this process was kind of a catharsis for them. He would then state that one of these entities was smaller in size than the original and remained that way for the remainder of the encounter. Then, in the next step that might surprise many, CAV attempted to actually grab or capture one of these entities, stating that he was under some type of altered thought process and that normally this would never be something he would consider. But when embracing the entity, it released a type of soapy liquid that let it slip out of his arms. CAV stated that he believed if he had proof of this encounter by taking one of them, then he could become rich. At some point, they agreed to return the following day in the same location with the requested chief, and so the entities climbed aboard the craft. CAV did not recall how the door closed, or if it did. He would remark that when it left, stating no, it inclined at about 30 degrees, made a semicircle as if it were going towards the hills, turned towards the sea, picked up great speed, and then disappeared. The entire encounter, as far as he could tell, was about half an hour. CAV would later return to that area. However, the entities did not return, possibly due to the chief not being in tow with CAV, but we can only speculate. And then that's it. That's everything associated with this encounter. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. Fascinating, right? The idea that you have something like this, a very detailed, very rich encounter involving something that even predated the Pascagoula abduction, but many of the characteristics match the Pascagoula abduction, especially with regards to how these beings looked. I mean, they had this almost body that mimicked exactly what they had with the Pascagoula encounter, including having a body and a head and legs, all of them that seemed to be joined together. No sign of ears or eyes or a nose or anything like that. And then the way they moved as well seemed to mimic the the encounter that I've talked about before as well. And then the fact that they would just suddenly appear and they would be there in the large spacecraft, and then they almost again seem to interact with people purposefully, all matches the previous stuff. But obviously where it differences is the fact that here, this mysterious person, whoever he was, CAV, was telepathically or potentially verbally speaking to them. He was having a sense of dialogue with them. They were talking about how the spacecraft moved. They were talking about how they procreated. They were talking about everything from how they ate and then what they were there for. And then he saw or heard them switch dialects, moving from English over to Spanish. But as he described them, it was as if they were learning and they never had any accents. But by far the most mysterious thing associated with this encounter, at least to me, was when they were talking about God. Like they were stating that no, it's almost like they didn't have any belief on their end, but they in turn were thinking themselves as gods. That opened up a whole world to me when I heard that, because imagine if they in turn were visiting from who knows how many centuries back, people would see them as gods. And so maybe they in turn thought to themselves as that, or they literally believed that they were gods. Who knows? But at least it's another fascinating turn when it comes to the mythology associated with aliens and UFOs and how much interactive they had with people. And then of course they were able to bring him on board. In this case, they didn't abduct him, not like the original encounter, but in turn they brought him on board and they started communicating with him, for even showed him a ride, like in other words took him to a spot, but warned him that they couldn't do much faster speed, otherwise it would harm him, and so on. So overall, a very fascinating encounter and richly detailed, so much so makes you wonder how hard it would be for someone to make this up. This moves more on the line of it being true, at least with regards to myself. It's too bad though that they didn't have any kind of pictures or drawings or anything else, whoever the strange CAV Peruvian man was, with regards to his encounter with the mummy-like entities. Otherwise, there would be hopefully something to share on a more detailed level. But the fact that this happened 70 plus years ago, and this man is probably dead by now, there's not going to be much else to essentially talk about from him. So whatever he mentioned here, that's all we have with regards to his encounter. But let me know what you guys and gals think. Lots of rich info, right? Let me know what you find the most fascinating thing about this encounter as well. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.